Guys, I want people to know the Saudi Arabian, the kingdom and the royal family did not know about what Osama bin Laden, famous anti-Soviet, anti-communist figure, son of oil and development magnate who literally was getting funding from the royal family. They did not know what he was up to. I'm former CIA, and I'm here to tell you that Osama bin Laden was up to no good, and no one in the Saudi family knew what he was up to.
His words, he said, something terrible.
Here, this is the CIA officer who exposed America's torture program. If I don't watch this, Jay Mershon is going to explode as though he's in a CIA torture facility himself.
Is going to happen.
I feel like this, I get bad vibes from this guy, by the way. I don't know why. I see him on TikTok all the time. First of all, I don't think anyone's ever a former CIA officer. There's no such thing. But I guess this is it.
We're hearing camp commanders on the phone with their students, and they're crying and saying, I'll see you in paradise. And he said, I'm begging you, if you have any sources inside Al-Qaeda, please help us. I was recruited by the CIA beginning in the late 1980s, but in a very odd way that is no longer legal. I was in graduate school at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and I was taking a class called The Psychology of Leadership that was taught by an eminent psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Gerald Post. Dr. Post gave us an assignment one day where we had to shadow our bosses and write a psychological evaluation of our bosses. And I was shadowing my boss, and he was a very difficult, mean, unpleasant, strong, brutish kind of person. And I went back to my apartment and I wrote my paper. And I said that he was a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies. I gave Dr. Post the paper, and a week later, he gives it back to me, and he gave me an A, and underneath the A, he wrote, please see me after class. So I went to see him, and I said, Dr. Post, you wanted to see me? He said, come to my office. So we went downstairs in the building into his little academic's office. He closed the door and he said, look, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here. And I'm looking for people who would fit into the CIA's culture. I think you would fit in. Do you want to be a CIA officer? And I said, yes. And so he made some calls. It was up to me to pass all the tests, and there were a lot of tests. But that's how I got into the CIA.
And I guess when you first joined the CIA, what was the global political landscape like, and what was the US's stance with their foreign policy?
When I joined the CIA, the Soviet Union was literally in the process of collapsing. And so all eyes were on Eastern Europe. My expertise was in the Middle East. I had a bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern studies. I had studied Islamic theology with one of the leading Muslim scholars in the West. And my master's degree was...
That's crazy, bro. This dude learned all about Islam just to torture people. Former CIA is a thing. What would you call Jonathan Pollard? Okay. Yeah, that's because he switched teams, but not really, but still kind of. He didn't torture anyone. He quit because of it and went to federal prison, just watched the video. Okay.
Was focused in foreign policy analysis. So I was very specific about the Middle East. And so I was assigned to Iraq, and I immediately became Saddam Hussein's classified biographer in the intelligence community. So while the Soviet Union is falling apart and those analysts are becoming big stars, I focused on Iraq, and then much to my shock and the world's shock, 9 months later, Iraq invaded Kuwait and overthrew the Kuwaiti royal family and seized Kuwait's oil fields. This was a naked act of aggression and war. And so I walked in that morning. I got up early because we knew that.
This is how they still recruited CIA. A lot of Georgetown and George Washington University. This guy lies sometimes, for sure. He also did a video with Chris Hedges and did serve 2 years or so in federal prison for blowing the whistle on Abu Ghraib. Wait, this is a guy? Okay, never mind. If he actually went to prison, then that's a little bit more respectful.
That the invasion was coming. We predicted 30 days before that Saddam would invade Kuwait. But I got into the office early, and my boss sort of intercepted me and said, "Don't take your jacket off. We're going to the White House." And I had never been to the White House before. So we got in a car, we drove to the White House, and we were escorted into the Oval Office. And keep in mind, I was 25 years old at the time. And you walk into the Oval Office, and here's the president, the vice president, the national security advisor, the CIA.
Should have got a life sentence. I mean, listen. If he actually is a whistleblower, then that's fine. You know, that's the best you're gonna expect from someone who worked in the most evil agency on the planet.
CIA director, my boss, and me. And the mood is very heavy. So everybody sits down, and the president says, "Well, now what do we do?" And then everybody turns and looks at me. And it took me a second to get my bearings. And I said, "Well, the Kuwaiti government's been overthrown. The Iraqi government announced this morning that they had installed Ahmed al-Khatib as the occupation governor of Kuwait." I said, "Unfortunately, we happen to know a lot about Ahmed Khatib. He got a medical degree at the American University of Beirut, and his college roommate was George Habash. And together, they created the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine." And the vice president says, "Jesus Christ." And I thought, wow, this is bad. We finished the briefing, got up and walked out, and two things happened. My boss said to me, "There's something you need to understand." He said, "I'm not sure that you're appreciating the importance of what's happening. It's not unusual for a country that we cover to go to war. It's highly unusual for a country that we cover to go to war with us." And then later that afternoon, Margaret Thatcher, who at the time was the British Prime Minister, called the president. It was George H.W. Bush, and famously told him, these were her words, "Now's not the time to go wobbly, George." And that call was like a wake-up call for George H.W. Bush. And so we sent the largest army deployed since the end of the Vietnam War. We invaded Kuwait, we liberated it, and then the rest is history.
You were then stationed in the Middle East. What was your role out there?
I served first in Saudi Arabia, then in Kuwait, and then I went back to headquarters for a while and decided that I so loved serving overseas that I wanted to do it on a longer-term basis. So I applied for what's called a rotation at the State Department. And I mean, this was an honest-to-God State Department job where I left the CIA and I went to the State Department. I was sworn in as a
very, very different function. Very different function from the CIA.
Foreign Service officer, and I became the economic officer at the American Embassy in Bahrain for 2 years, and then back to headquarters to work on Iraq again. But I did get bored. After 7.5 years of Iraq, every single day Iraq. And so I made a very unusual transition from intelligence to operations, and specifically to counter-terrorist operations.
And what does that mean?
So as an analyst, your job is to sit in a cubicle, read all source intelligence that's coming in from all over the world, think the big thoughts, write papers that probably nobody will ever read. Once or twice a week, you write something for the president, if it's important enough to merit his attention. And then you go home at the end of the day. Counterterrorism operations was what you see in the movies.
Is the Foreign Service actually that close to the CIA? Yes. The State Department is basically like, it's the same thing. It's so the same thing that they literally, even in movies, they basically admit that it's the same thing. Like, it's a cover.
Straight into weapons. And then after weapons, I went into explosives. After explosives, I went into counter-terrorist driving, and then advanced counter-terrorist driving, which was out in the desert out west. And then you learn how to spot, assess, develop, and recruit spies to steal secrets.
And what year was this?
That was 1997.
And was there any other time in these years that you were questioning the ethics of the agency and the work you were doing?
No, I didn't question the ethics of the agency at the time for a very specific reason. When Bill Clinton was elected president, he issued an order that the CIA had to, what they called, cull their recruited assets. Anybody who had what the White House described as a human rights problem was to be fired, right? So we didn't want to do business anymore in the 1990s with death squad leaders or assassins.
Okay, this is why I'm saying that, like, this is why I say that, like, a couple things that he said so far are, like, not entirely correct. Like, he's still, this is why he's just like, once you're an agent, you just still have that agent mindset. This is exactly the type of shit that I hear, even from a guy who's a whistleblower. There is a lot, there's a lot of stuff that he's saying that still does kind of reputation laundering for the CIA. Like saying, oh, I switched teams, I went to the State Department as a Foreign Service officer. Like, that's not as though that is like separate from his activities as a part of the CIA, or even when he says stuff like oh, we culled our assets after the directive from Bill Clinton. We culled through our assets, like recruited assets, and we weren't working with like death squad leaders and things like that. That's bullshit. There's never been a moment in CIA history that they have not worked with death squads in general. That's bullshit. The CIA will work with everybody. The CIA will work with communists. Okay, it is the most agnostic agency on the planet. Make no mistake. They will literally work with straight up communists. I mean, and I'm not even talking about Rojava, which is a great example of this, right? As long as it suits their purpose, they will literally work with anyone and everyone. There is no ideological enemy for the CIA. It is an agnostic agency that is in it for the love of the game, is in it for evil, that's in it to advance America's interests, that is in it to advance the empire's interests, and they will absolutely even work and back both sides of a conflict. They will absolutely work and back communist groups as well as Nazis and death squad leaders and whatnot. Obviously, more often than not, the ones whose ambitions are closely aligned with Americans will be the Nazi ones, but
and Clinton was serious about that. And I remember saying to a colleague at the time, I can't believe they're actually serious about human rights. This is really a very pleasant surprise for me. But Bill Clinton wasn't president forever. He was only president for 8 years. And then 9/11 happened, and literally everything changed in the blink of an eye.
Like, I am to assume that Bill Clinton, who was also responsible for significant portions, if not probably one of the most responsible parties for like the #1 anti-terror initiative that has been from the start to finish one of the most significant like Middle Eastern terrorism operations in the American State Department, as far as American foreign policy, is Palestinians. Okay, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, any kind of pro-Palestinian org around the world has in perpetuity been considered terrorist organizations. As I've talked before, Palestinian liberation organizations broadly were the first orgs that were ever called terrorist and in legal language. Like the definition, the terrorism definition, the terrorism designation unironically comes from Palestinian ones. And that is directly Israeli influence in American foreign policy, specifically around the Middle East. The idea that Jeffrey Epstein affiliate, Jeffrey Epstein associate Bill Clinton, who also played a formative role in the so-called peace process, was refusing to work with, these sorts of figures is ridiculous.
So in 2001, where were you working? What was your role at that time?
In 2001, I had just returned from my first overseas operational tour in Athens. And I was working in headquarters, and my job was to train Middle Eastern intelligence services in how to carry out counterterrorism operations. And so I had to go to the White House on the morning of September 11th, 2001, with the director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, Ambassador Kofor Black. And I walked over to...
You know what I see this as? I see this as like a CIA declassified document. You know what I mean? 20 years after the fact, 30 years after the fact, 40 years after the fact, the CIA will just like openly declassify something that everybody pretty much knew and offer you a deeper insight into things that you already had suspected or things that you already had pieced together through looking at the impact, right? And this guy kind of feels that way when he reveals certain information or recounts certain things that happen, where it's very careful. His language is very careful. There's like a bunch of whitewashing taking place. And it's just like confirmations for stuff that you knew already.
To his office to tell him that our car was ready to take us to the White House. And when I got there, his secretary had a small TV on her desk because you couldn't watch TV on your computers back then. And the news was on, and one of the towers of the World Trade Center was burning. And I said, "What happened to the World Trade Center?" She said, "A plane had flown into it." And I said, "Well, you know, that happened once before. In 1932, a plane flew into the Empire State Building, but it was really raining and very foggy that day."
Yeah, right. CIA agent said, "What happened on 9/11? And then responded with, "Oh, just that? It's happened before." Wait, one of our boys finally did it. Damn. That's what he said. He said, "Shit, not Atta, not him." And then the secretary said, "Wait, how do you know the name of the architect?" And he was like, "What? I meant Atta boy." That's what I meant. Yeah, he said, "Wait, did it hit the first or the second tower?"
It's so clear today. How can you not see that you're flying into the World Trade Center? And as soon as I said it, the second plane hit. And she turned to me and she said, "Did you see that? Or did I imagine it?" And I ran back to my office and I said, "Guys, 2 planes just hit both towers of the World Trade Center. I think we're under attack." And then everybody ran up to the director's office, TVs all over the place. And we're all just standing there. And then the 3rd plane hits the Pentagon. There was an officer from the...
And at that point, I was like, all right, we did that one.
CIA police force. We have our own internal police force. And he came in and he said, "Everybody evacuate right now, everybody evacuate." Nobody budged. We just stood there. And then finally somebody shouted, behind me, somebody shouted, "Will someone please lead?" And Kofor said, "Yeah, you go to the director's office and tell him this. You go to security and tell him that. You go up to operations." And, and so everybody started to scramble. The rest of us are just standing there. And then finally, a guy said to me, a guy I was standing next to, he said, "There's still a plane in the air. And I think we should probably assume that it's coming here." So,
Nah, they wouldn't. Why would they? Why would they team kill? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make any sense.
so my girlfriend, who later became my wife, she was also a senior CIA officer. She met me at my apartment, and we went to the roof and
That's
we watched
friendly
the
fire.
Pentagon burn for an hour. And then she said, "We should try to donate blood." So we went. There were blood mobiles all over the place, but the lines were so long, they told us it'll be 24 hours before they could clear the line. And I said to her, "This is ridiculous. We have to go back to work." So I walked back to my car, drove across the grassy median, drove back to the CIA, and then I didn't leave for 4 days. I just balled up my jacket and I slept under my desk.
And I guess from that point, it changed everything.
It changed literally everything. I remember saying to a colleague, "Do they realize what they've done?" I mean, I get that this group wants to strike a blow to US hegemony and the empire. I get it. But do they know nothing from history? Do they not know that our response is going to be 1,000 times what they did to us? And certainly, you know, we spent altogether in the so-called war on terror, we spent $23 trillion, and we killed as many as 2 million people. Did they not see that coming? Osama bin Laden said later that he wanted to damage the US economy. He failed. And he was responsible then for, you know, the deaths of an untold number of people. What did he think he was really going to accomplish? So it was a failure all around and changed the world permanently.
And who was Osama bin Laden and what was his intention?
The bin Laden family is a very honorable, very highly respected family. Dozens of them live permanently in the United States. They have billions and billions of dollars, and they have made that money through bin Laden Industries. So Osama bin Laden, who had vacationed as a teenager in the United States and all over Western Europe and was very Americanized, self-radicalized after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. He went to Afghanistan.
They just self-radicalized. No involvement here whatsoever. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is the type of shit that that you can find out through like the voluntary contributions to the media by people like Brzezinski, Mika Brzezinski's dad. Like, it's not like, this isn't even a secret any longer. You know what I mean? This isn't even like declassified information. This is already out there, like readily available for people to find on their own.
In the late 1980s to fight the Soviets.
Like, it's kind of funny that he's saying that, because you would just say they radicalized. The very fact that you inserted self-radicalized there only invites suspicion. Like, he had to be like, oh, they self-radicalized. They did it. They just, you know, they got They got angry on their own.
He was the only member of his family that self-radicalized. Everybody else, lived the good life in France, in the UK, and in the United States. And so he came up on our radar as somebody who was potentially dangerous. I sat next to a guy when I first got hired. And in the summer of 1990, he wrote a paper saying that he believed Osama bin Laden was the most dangerous man in the world. And I remember saying, who? I never heard of this guy. And he said, buddy, this is one bad guy. Watch and see. Watch and see. Well, 5 years later, I'm living in Bahrain. I'm at lunch in the embassy cafeteria, and the TV is on. And here there's a terrorist attack in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, at a facility called OPM Sang. This was a joint facility of the US military and the Saudi Arabian National Guard. And terrorists had gotten onto the base and had killed something like 5 people. And I think they were all third country nationals. I think they were Indians. So this group called Al-Qaeda took responsibility for this attack. Nobody had ever heard of Al-Qaeda.
Dude's a CIA agent, seemingly gets all his information from cafeteria TVs.
Qaeda.
Yeah, it's normal.
So the Saudis did what the Saudis do, and they rounded up 12.5 people. They all confessed using the identical language on national TV, and they were all immediately beheaded. Some of them may have had something to do with the attack. Some of them probably didn't have anything to do with the attack, but certainly the masterminds of this attack got away, bin Laden being the one, and he went to Afghanistan. Well, in Afghanistan, with the fall of the pro-Soviet communist government, and the advent of a Taliban government, he was free to do anything he wanted. And so he ordered that his underlings...
Guys, I want people to know the Saudi Arabian, the kingdom and the royal family did not know about what Osama bin Laden, famous anti-Soviet, anti-communist figure, son of oil and development magnate of the bin Laden family, who literally was getting funding from the royal family. They did not know what he was up to. I want you to know I'm former CIA, and I'm here to tell you that Osama bin Laden was up to no good, and no one in the Saudi family knew what he was up to. Make no mistake. They did not know, okay? I am no longer in the CIA, and I'm telling you with all earnesty.
Create 2 training camps in southern Afghanistan, one in Kandahar province and one in Helmand province. By 2001, Al-Qaeda had carried out several large-scale attacks. And we said, well, we've got to get on the stick, and we have to find this guy, and we have to stop him. So the FBI began investigating so that he could be charged with a crime. The CIA began looking for him. We knew that he was somewhere in Afghanistan, probably in Kandahar, but it was impossible to really find him. And then on July the 6th, 2001, I was at CIA headquarters, and I was entertaining a delegation from a Middle Eastern intelligence service. We did this literally every single day. I had arranged a briefing on Al-Qaeda with a young, like 23-year-old analyst. So I said, well, we're going to start off today with a briefing on Al-Qaeda. The door opens and Ambassador Black walks in with the chief of operations for the Osama bin Laden group. And I was so shocked, I stood up and I said, gentlemen, this is Ambassador Kofor Black. He is the CIA's director of counterterrorism, and this is the director of operations for our Osama bin Laden group. And he sat down, and I'll never forget his words. He said, something terrible.
Remember when the Taliban offered bin Laden to Bush almost right after? Or, well, that is one of the interesting parts about this. But also, do you remember the Mujahideen, another faction that was against Osama bin Laden, unironically tried to hand Osama bin Laden to the CIA before 9/11, and then on September 10th, the I forget his name now, but the dude who tried to do that, who was in hiding, was assassinated with information on his whereabouts that were given to Shah Massoud, that were basically given to Al Qaeda, where he was assassinated by two people that were portraying themselves as journalists that were interviewing him, that actually were not interested in interviewing him at all, and they were interviewed September 10th, I think, or 9th. On the 9th of September 2001, 2 days before 9/11, Ahmad Shah Massoud was assassinated by two Al Qaeda operatives posing as journalists in the Khawaja Bahauddin district in Takhar province. Massoud, a pivotal guerrilla fighter nicknamed the Lion of Panjshir, had insurgent forces against the governments of Daoud Khan, communist government under the People Democratic Party of Afghanistan, invading Soviet forces, and the 1990s Taliban de facto regime. At the time of his assassination, Massoud commanded the forces of the Northern Alliance, backed by the United States, India, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Iran, fighting against Taliban forces backed by Pakistan, also the United States of America, by way of Pakistan. Massoud remained a vocal critic of the Pakistani interference in Afghanistan through the Taliban and Osama bin Laden's Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, including publicly warning U.S. President George W. Bush 5 months prior to 9/11 that the situation in Afghanistan, if unresolved, will also affect the United States and a lot of other countries. Shortly after a press conference in the European Parliament in which Massoud denounced Pakistani interference, the Taliban, and Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden called for volunteers to deal with Ahmad Shah Massoud. From their training camp in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, Al Qaeda's Ayman al-Zawahiri and Abu Hani al-Masri planned and prepared the operation. Two Tunisian, don't ever talk about Pakistan again, buddy. Shut the fuck up, bitch. Two Tunisian Arabic attackers in Europe, Abdes Sattar Dahmani and Rashid Baori al-Awer, were brought to Afghanistan, where they provided a stolen television camera and a battery belt packed with explosives. With an interview fraudulently arranged by Zawahiri and al-Masri, the two assassins were escorted by Taliban to the Panjshir Valley, flying by helicopter to join Massoud at his rear headquarters in Khawaja Bahauddin. After weeks of failed attempts, Massoud agreed to sit with the Arabs and conduct the interview. After peppering Massoud with questions about his condemnation of bin Laden, al-Aware detonated his bomb, mortally wounding Massoud. Despite a timely medical evacuation by helicopter to a military clinic in Tajikistan, Massoud was pronounced dead on arrival. The timing of Ahmad Shah Massoud's assassination has drawn significant attention, taking place only 2 days before the September 11th attacks in the United States. Though the attackers lacked any control over the exact date, waiting weeks for Massoud to make time for the purported interview, many still debate whether Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri had planned Massoud's assassination with the intention of disabling the Northern Alliance before 9/11, after which the United States would join them in a campaign to topple the Taliban regime. A partially declassified U.S. intelligence report on November 2001 revealed that Massoud's intelligence apparatus had gained limited knowledge regarding the intentions of Osama bin Laden and his terrorist organization Al-Qaeda to perform a terrorist attack against the U.S. on a scale larger than the 1998 bombing of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Though Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the attack, debates continue over the allegations of Pakistani inter-services intelligence, covert support to, or complicity in the assassination of Ahmad Shah Massoud. Kapat. Tanzania. Anyway, your pronunciation is just as good as any Fox host. Okay, calm down. All right, it's hard. I try to do my best. Yeah. How good of a source is Wikipedia on things like this? I mean, shit like this is only going to be in magazines like Counterpunch. The very fact that this has made its way to Wikipedia is unique in and of itself. I believe Counterpunch magazine actually wrote extensively on this. What is this? It seems that our new rulers here in the liberal West have homed in on a new way of turning a person into a non-person. Here's a man, Hussein Doğru, a German journalist of Turkish origins, but not a dual citizen, whom the EU authorities have found a novel, immensely cruel way of punishing for his coverage and his views on Palestine. German authorities learned a lesson from my case, not wishing to be answerable in a court for any ban on pro-Palestinian voices similar to court case I'm dragging them through currently. They found another way, a direct sanction by the EU utilizing some hitherto unused directive, one introduced at the beginning of the Ukraine war, that allows Brussels to sanction any citizen of the EU it deems to be working for Russian interests. Clinging to the argument that Hussein's website podcast used to be shown also on Ruptly, among many other platforms, they're using this directive aimed at an anti-Russian asset to destroy a journalist dared to oppose the Palestinian genocide. In practice, this means that Hussein's bank account is frozen, that if you or I were to give him cash to buy groceries or make rent, we would be considered his accomplices and subject to similar sanctions. It also means that if he were a civil servant, he would be fired. If he were a student, he would be expelled from his university. If he received a pension, it would be suspended. If he received any social benefit, it would be frozen. It also, astonishingly, means he cannot leave Germany. Last but definitely not least, it means that Hussein cannot sue his government for turning him into a non-person, but only challenge the European Commission in Brussels, where he's not even allowed to go. Yeah, this is f***ed up. This is the guy who is in charge of Red, right? I think that's what it was, right? The German dude of Turkish origin. Isn't that it? If it makes me safer, I'm okay with it. Dog, you don't even live in Germany or the European Union. You live in America. Like, what do you mean if it makes me safer? Yeah, this guy's the editor of Red. You've probably seen them on Red Media. This thing. How does this not terrify people, dude? That's crazy. Or not Red Media. Wait, did they delete the account entirely? Isn't it Red? Was it not Red? Red Letter Media? No, dude. Is it Red Letter Media? I don't think it's Red Letter Media. No, it's not. That's a totally separate thing. That's like a Star Trek thing. No, Redfish. Is it Redfish? No, it's not Redfish either. Redstream. Oh. Yeah, this is it. 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 All of you guys are so dumb sometimes. I swear to God. This is it. Yeah. Proudly sanctioned by the EU for exposing their complicity in a genocide. This is the dude. Hussein Doğru. APAC tracker posted her Gillibrand rant.
Alarmed.
I found one Chinese government's worst policy decisions. Red Pandas banned. Red Letter Media was supposed to fix my VCR. I'm still waiting. It's been years. Yeah, time to justify the unjustifiable sanctions. I like that I said red and like a million chatters chimed in. Just FYI, saying Red Letter Media is Star Trek is saying you do drama. I don't know anything about them. I just Googled Red Letter Media and Star Trek is the first thing that popped up. Give me a goddamn break. Calm down. Y'all are annoying. I apologize to Red Letter Media fandom.
Is going to happen. We don't know when and we don't know where, but we know it's going to be an attack on a massive scale. We're hearing code words for a huge attack. The honey salesman is coming with vast quantities of honey. There's going to be a great wedding. There's going to be a great football match. These are all code words for an attack. He said, we're hearing camp commanders on the phone with their students, and they're crying and saying, I'll see you in paradise. And he said, I'm begging you, if you have any sources inside Al-Qaeda, please help us. They were just as shocked by this briefing as I was. They didn't say anything. He got up, he shook their hands, they walked out. At the end of the day, I sent these guys back to their hotel. It was going to be a few hours before dinner. So I went to Kofer's office to thank him for spending the time. I said, Kofer, I have to ask you, I'm not working on Al-Qaeda. Did you say that just for their benefit, or were you serious? And he said, oh, I was deadly serious. Something terrible is going to happen. And then sure enough, 2 months later, there it was.
From that
Being a libcoded CIA agent is S-tier strat for normies. Yeah.
moment after
They're
September
like,
11th,
wow, he's CIA, but woke.
you were very involved in tracking down senior members of Al Qaeda. How did that work?
Well, like everybody in the building, I volunteered to go to Afghanistan on September 12th. And I volunteered again and again and again, 4 times. And they kept putting me off.
Damn, this guy couldn't get enough. He was like, I want the smoke. I want all the smoke.
Well, I was one of only 16 fluent Arabic speakers at the CIA at the time.
What? Wait, I'm sorry. Before the war on terror, there were only 16 fluent Arabic speakers of the CIA. I don't believe that even a little bit. What is this man saying? Yes, they lost all their assets in 9/11. Why is that not believable? Ain't no way, dude. Are you kidding me? Does the CIA employ? First of all, you have the State Department right there. The CIA has 21,575 agents, employees, estimated. Now, you might say, that's now, okay? Let's say back then they had 10,000 agents. Ali Soufan said he was the only Arabic-speaking FBI agent in New York City. Also, they don't even speak Arabic in Afghanistan, but that's besides the point. I'm not even understanding why he brought that up as a important point. But like the fact that the CIA has 16 agents that speak, like, what? The U.S. carried out at least 13 major military operations or interventions in the Middle East before 9/11. This includes covert CIA operations, direct military strikes, and large-scale deployments between 1940s and 2001. Like, what do you mean? They were doing that with 16 guys in a dream? Really? 16 guys in a dream. They were targeting assets in the region, and they were like, you better speak American, boy. Like, they would go to dudes who speak Pashtun in the valley, and they were like, do you speak American? I'm here with a proposal, sir. White boy speaks perfect fluent Arabic, shocks everyone. When are we gonna get Jelani on Vlad TV? Jelani on Vlad TV. He's like, yeah, man. Yes, this Diddy case is unbearable to witness. Listen, when I was the Grand Vizier of Al Qaeda in Syria, I saw some heinous shit, but I never thought this Diddy oil controversy is something that human beings would be capable of doing. On Vlad TV, he's gonna offer his takes on the Diddy case. Okay, let's keep going.
I had worked years earlier for the deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center, so I considered him to be a friend. I went into his office and I made a bold and completely empty threat. And I said, if you don't send me to Afghanistan right now, I am going straight to Exxon with my Arabic and I'm not looking back. And he says, take it easy, take it easy. Can you go to Pakistan? And I said, yes. When? He said, tomorrow. I said, yes. What do you want me to do there? He said, I want you to be the chief of counterterrorism operations. I said, fine. And so I left the next day. I arrived in Islamabad at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then the driver said, oh, I'll pick you up at 7 to take you in the office. And I said, oh my God, please. I can't sleep on planes. I haven't slept since I left Washington. It's been
What is this? FBI situation was even worse. The source says through most of the 1990s, only 2 translators at FBI headquarters spoke the language. As recently as last year, the General Accounting Office, an investigative arm of Congress, found that the FBI, State Department, and Army all continue to have trouble finding language specialists. The report did not look at intelligence agencies. I don't believe this for the CIA, dude. I'm sorry. That's just there's no way. Like, sure, they expeditiously needed more than they had, but the idea that the number was 16 is insane. Agency, less than a dozen CIA field agents could speak the language spoken by the groups that were consensus favorites to mount attacks on America. Particularly damning for intelligence agencies after 9/11 were reports that only a handful of agents throughout the CIA spoke fluent Arabic. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. This is a, like, I love talking shit about the American intelligence apparatus being far, far, far more diminished than we think it is. Okay. But if you think that the CIA, the CIA did not have enough, like more than a handful, more than a dozen agents that spoke fluent Arabic, is crazy. If you put Pashto in your LinkedIn, I'd get a contractor position that I'm pretty sure was for the State Department, and that recruiter would constantly hit me up. Those numbers do not include the people at think tanks funded by defense contractors like the Institute for the Study of War. I don't know what it was like that back then, but people could get their college loans paid off by defense contractors. I mean, there's a lot of outsourcing. I guess that makes sense. Maybe it's the outsourcing that they're not factoring into this number, but even then, there's 16 is just so 16 is a severe undercount, I don't think. Even if there was like 10,000 agents at the time, 0% shot that only a handful knew how to speak fluent Arabic. Like, that sounds crazy. Because, like, how did they pull off any of the operations that they did? Like, this is far before 9/11, okay? America's interventions in the region far, far, far precede the war on terror. There has never been a moment where we haven't been involved in the Middle East. And even to hire local contractors and to be able to keep up with local contractors. Because once again, you go, oh, well, they have local contractors. Okay, sure, of course. Of course they do. But you think that agency doesn't have to have like enough fluent people that can, at the very least, check in with the local contractors? They're not just like handing off piles of money to be like, all right, go do your thing, king. Someone has to speak to them. Someone has to check in. It's not just one guy. They were just communicating with shapes and colors the whole time. Importantly, Curacao usually clarifies that he means full-time field officers, case officers, people expected to live undercover overseas. Most CIA Arabic linguists work in analysis, translation, decision support, or as staff instructors at the language school in Virginia.
24 hours. Let me have another hour, pick me up at 8. So he picked me up at 8. I was like a zombie. And I went in and introduced myself to the chief. And I said, I'm your new chief of counterterrorism. And he said, okay, have a seat. So he said, here's what I want.
Do you think that many people are needed to destabilize a region? Yes. Also, the CIA doesn't just work as one agency. The CIA does routinely rely on think tanks that we know and love, like Foundations for Defending Democracy, for example. They rely heavily on think tanks, and they even rely heavily on the media. They rely heavily on the universities, and also they rely heavily on. They also rely heavily on what do you call it? NGOs as well.
I want you to do today. I want you to come up with a standard operating procedure to take down a terrorist safe house. And I said, okay. So I went back to my office and I sat with a legal pad and a pen. And I thought, okay, if I were going to take down a terrorist safe house, how would I do that? And then I thought, I would want it to be dark. I wouldn't want anybody to see me. So I wrote 0200 at the top of the paper. And then I thought, I need weapons, like lots of weapons. I bought guns ammunition, night vision goggles, battering rams, bulletproof vests, knives, walkie-talkies. From scratch, we started this thing. And I thought, well, 9/11 is an open criminal investigation, so I have to invite the FBI. And this is Pakistan. It is their country, after all, so I have to invite the Pakistanis. So I wrote, joint team, CIA, FBI, ISI, with the list of weapons. I ordered the weapons. They were there, in days. So a week later, we did our first test raid. We caught 2 Al-Qaeda fighters. Another few days later, we caught an actual mid-level guy from Egyptian Islamic Jihad. It worked. And then finally, 6 weeks later, we get word from a sister agency in the Washington suburbs that Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, was somewhere in Pakistan, and we had to catch him. That was all we knew. He was somewhere in Pakistan. And I said, in our morning meeting, I said, this country is the size of Texas. It has 220 million people in it. What do you mean he's in Pakistan? Go catch him. But we came up with a plan, and we caught him. He was shot 3 times and severely wounded. So I sat with Abu Zubaydah for 56 hours after we shot him. The Pakistani doctors there saved his life, pumping blood into him as quickly as they could. It was just oozing out of him, pooling underneath the bed. He was soaked in blood. We were soaked in blood. It was like a scene out of a horror movie. But he lived. And then finally he asked me, what's going to happen to me? And I said, honestly, I don't know. But I'm going to give you some advice. I said, I am the nicest guy that you're going to meet in this experience. My colleagues, they're not nice like I am. So if you do one thing, it's that you have to cooperate. And he said, you seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy, and I'll never cooperate. Finally, a CIA jet flew in, and 3 FBI agents and I picked up his gurney and carried him out to the plane. He was crying. He asked if I would hold his hand, which I did. We had to maneuver him. We had to stand him up on the gurney. He was strapped down to maneuver him onto the plane. We laid him on the luggage rack at the back of the plane and tied him down. And he squeezed my hand, and I said, remember, you have to cooperate. And then he flew off. Well, a few weeks later, I flew back to headquarters. And I was in the cafeteria one day, just standing in the sandwich line. And a senior officer walked up to me and said, very casually, hey, I'm so glad I ran into you. Do you want to be certified in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques? And I had never heard that term before. This was May of 2002. I said, what's that mean? And he says, we're going to start getting rough with these guys. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he described these 10 techniques. And I said, that sounds like a torture program. And he said, it's not torture. The Justice Department approved it and the president signed it. We're going to start soon. You want to be in? And I said, let me think about it. I consulted a very senior officer, went back downstairs, and I said, this is a torture program. I have an ethical and moral problem with it. I think it's illegal, and I'm not interested. Well, of the 14 people that they approached, I was the only one who said no. And on August the 2nd, 2002, CIA began to torture Abu Zubaydah, and they tortured him mercilessly.
And what method of torture were they?
Well, they were supposed to start off with the least dangerous and least offensive technique, which was called the attention grab, where you grab him by the shirt and give him a shake and say, Answer my questions. And it gets gradually worse from there. But they didn't do that. They started with the worst technique, waterboarding. They strapped him down to a board. His feet were elevated compared to his head. They put some material cloth around his face and in his mouth, and then started pouring water on his face. They did this 87 times. And he actually drowned at one point. His heart stopped. And then they revived him just so that they could torture him more.
Was Abu Zubaydah the first?
Abu Zubaydah was the first. He was the test case. And in a very rapid succession, we caught some of the most important leaders of Al-Qaeda. We caught Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. He was waterboarded 100. Abu Zubaydah was 83 times up, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded 187 times. We used other techniques that I even believed were worse than waterboarding. We used one called the cold cell, where we strip the prisoner naked and then chain him to an eye bolt in the ceiling so he can't sit or lay or get comfortable in any way. And
we know from reporting out of Guantanamo, the least offensive techniques included, wall slam. That's why I thought it was funny when he was talking about the t-shirt thing. But yeah, that's another one of the least offensive techniques, is like slamming someone into a wall. It's crazy. Sleep deprivation, music, having a sensory deprivation. I mean, we've done some of them with the boys, with the Aussie boys, if you remember. I waterboarded. I did a thing, if you guys remember. Stress positions. Israel has perfected it. Like, Israel's torture methods are insane. There's a banana hold, where they just like put you on a chair backwards, tie your hands to your feet. A lot of these techniques are still being used by the Israeli occupying forces in Israeli prisons. Find out more by reading Adamir, the Palestinian prisoner rights group, that of course I believe Israel considers a terrorist group as well.
We chill the cell to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then every hour a CIA officer throws a bucket of ice water on him. We murdered 2 prisoners with that technique. They died of hypothermia and then were just buried there on the grounds, unmarked. There was another technique called sleep deprivation, right? We all know what sleep deprivation is. But what they did in this case was they strip you naked, chain you to that eye bolt in the ceiling again, and then have these industrial strength lights on you and loud acid rock, death metal music 24 hours a day. We know from the American Psychological Association that people begin to lose their minds at day 7, and they begin to die at day 9. Your organs shut down. The CIA kept people awake as long as 12 days, and people did lose their minds. So it just got worse.
This is a good opportunity to remind people that they knew that this method, torture, enhanced interrogation, whatever you want to call it, was approved by the Supreme Court of the United States. And also it led to 0 actionable intelligence, because it turns out when you get tortured, unlike in the movies, you just lie to stop the torture. You just say whatever you want them to hear, because you just want the pain to stop. You're like, yes, I am the mastermind of 9/11 and 9/12, if you want that to be the case. Information received under duress and torturous conditions like this have never led to actionable intelligence. Okay? Yes, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, in his opinion justifying torture, used the show 24 as a reason as to why. Where he said, in a hypothetical situation like in the show with Jack Bauer in the show 24, what if there was a nuclear first strike that was imminent, that was going to happen in Washington, D.C., and torture was the necessary method to get this information out? That is a real thing that has happened, coming from the brilliant mind of Antonin Scalia, a real former Supreme Court of the United States justice who died in a like a hunting lodge, I think.
And worse and worse. And I kept waiting for somebody to say something.
These techniques were successful in gathering intelligence?
Well, see, that's the thing, is all of these techniques were unsuccessful in gathering intelligence. The intelligence that we gathered successfully was intelligence gathered by the FBI in the person of Ali Soufan, who was an FBI agent who used the tried and true FBI technique of establishing a rapport with the prisoner, a relationship. You offer him a cup of tea, a cigarette, an orange, a piece of paper to write a letter to his mother. You don't beat him and torture him and kill him. And so under Ali's, guidance, Abu Zubaydah gave us actionable intelligence that saved American lives. And the CIA would start torturing him and he would go completely silent. So it was not just wrong ethically and legally, but it didn't work. If anything, it just made the situation worse.
What was the turning point that made you decide to go public about this torture program?
This program was so clearly wrong to me that I anticipated someone going public, and no one went public. Well, I resigned from the CIA effective spring of 2005 and went into the private sector. In December of 2007, I got a call from a reporter from ABC News, which is one of the major news major networks in the United States, the American Broadcasting Corporation. And this journalist said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely not true. I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. And he said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. I didn't know that was a reporter's trick. I'd never spoken to a reporter before. I said, yeah, I'll think about it.
So this guy was doing this guy was in the CIA at this point for 25, 30 years. And he had never spoken to a reporter before and got tricked by a reporter. I don't believe a single damn thing that is coming out of his mouth, dude. That is crazy, okay? You got baited by a journalist.
Well, 2 days later, President Bush gives a press conference in which he looks in the camera and he says, "We do not torture," like that. And I said to my wife, he is a bald-faced liar. He's
his CIA wife. His wife is also in the CIA.
looking the American people in the eye and he's lying. And then 2 days later, he was walking to the helicopter to fly to Camp David. And reporters always shout questions at the president when he's walking in a helicopter. And usually he just goes like this, like he can't hear, and waves. They can always hear. So a reporter shouts a question about torture and he turns and he says, well, if there is torture, it's because of a rogue CIA officer. And I said to my wife, Brian Ross's source is at the White House, and they're going to try to pin this on me because they were angry that I was the only one that declined. So I called the reporter, Brian Ross, and I said, I'll give you your interview. And I decided in the days leading up to it that I was simply going to tell the truth. No matter what he asked me, I was just going to tell the truth. And that's what I did.
And what truth was that?
The truth was the CIA was torturing its prisoners. Torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue. And the policy had been personally approved by the president. So the FBI began investigating me at the CIA's behest. They investigated me for an entire year, from December of 2007 to December of 2008. And they determined that I had not committed a crime, that torture was illegal, and it is illegal to classify an illegality. And so they said, oh, you're free to go. So my wife and I actually went out that night to celebrate.
Yeah, famously, when the government is doing illegal stuff and you blow the whistle on it, they go, oh no, we were doing something illegal and now everybody knows it's obviously illegal to openly to prosecute someone for revealing illegal information that the government is doing. They go, damn. Yeah, famously, that's usually what happens.
3 weeks later, Barack Obama became president, and he named John Brennan as the Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism. John and I always hated each other. And I didn't know that John asked the Justice Department to secretly reopen the case against me. So for the next 3 years, my phones were tapped, my emails were intercepted, and teams of FBI agents followed me everywhere I went. Finally, in January of 2012, I was arrested and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage. Espionage can be a death penalty offense. And so I had to fight. I was confident in my heart that I had done nothing wrong. The espionage charges were thrown out. I hadn't committed espionage. But I had 5 children at home. And I had gone bankrupt because of the legal fees. I actually still owe my attorneys $1,150,000 that they'll never see. I'll never have that money to pay them. And so the judge.
Do you think there's any truth in what he's saying? I mean, yeah, everything he's saying is correct as far as like all the broad strokes of what he's talked about is 100% correct. Yes, the CIA had a torture campaign. It was made legal after, and he is the whistleblower on the torture campaign. And he did go to a prison for this. I just still don't trust him as far as some of the ways that he talks about the CIA's operations, even now.
Justice Department does what it does, and they offered me a deal. I was facing 45 years. They offered me 23 months. And I actually turned it down. And my lead attorney got right in my face. And he said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice. And it's not about justice. It's about mitigating damage. Take the deal. Well, I had done some research. And I found a study by ProPublica that found that the government wins 98.2% of its cases. And he said, do you really want to roll the dice? So I took the deal.
And you served those 23 months?
I served every single day of those 23 months. Every day. Well, first of all, I should say, I have 0 regrets. Somebody had to say something. 0 regrets because I wanted to be able to sleep at night. I wanted my children to be proud of me. And I didn't want future generations to say, you know, that Kiriakou guy, he could have stopped this. And he didn't. You know, what kind of person is that? I wanted to be on the right side of this. I knew what was right and wrong. It was clear. It was obvious. There were a lot of bad guys in very senior, important roles at the CIA. I had to counter that. And, you know, I said also that these CIA people, if they thought that prison was going to cow me, was going to silence me, they didn't know me at all. So in my view, I won.
And you think it's had an impact on the way the CIA operates now?
It has absolutely, definitely had an impact. In fact, when Gina Haspel became the CIA director during the first Trump administration, we used to call her Bloody Gina because she was the godmother.
This part is also true.
Of the torture program. In her confirmation hearings before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, she said that the torture program was wrong and that she wished she had nothing to do with it. And I said, I call that a victory.
And any intelligence officer or anyone that kind of witnesses wrongdoing and they want to speak out, what advice would you give to someone?
You have to go with your conscience. The CIA likes for its officers to believe that everything in life is a shade of gray. And that's just simply not true. Some things in life are black and white, right and wrong. And deep down, we know what's right and what's wrong. So trust yourself. trust your judgment, even if you know there's going to be fallout.
We knew that we were being hunted by the special branch.
I mean, he's an interesting dude. No, I mean he's better than the current working CIA officers. I'll always respect whistleblowers. He is a whistleblower. Make no mistake. I'm just saying that I don't completely trust him, if that makes sense. Hasan Reactions is one of the best ones in the React channel.